talk to other people that know them. And because we know each other. I know, like, I go to conferences with the other guys in town. There's only two other in Santa Barbara. Like, it's me and two other doctors. That's it for all of Santa Barbara. And, so we all know each other.
I love it. Okay, so I got us going on YouTube. For those of you who don't know this, we do record all of these. So we've mixed things up a little bit. We have one webinar per week on Wednesdays at this time. So 1 p.m. Central is this webinar, and we kind of rotate through our topics. So we may be talking about a type 2 diabetes topic, a healthy heart topic, or maybe a home cures that work topic. And what we mean by that is Barton has a publication that's been around for a very long time. Before I started with Barton Nutrition in 2012, it was there before then. And lots of wonderful articles. You can look up homecuresthatwork.com. Dr. Saunders has written many articles for this publication. It was like this cool place back when I first started where I would go to get information about natural remedies. There wasn't a lot of other places to go. And so it's still in production. It's still wonderful. And we're going to talk about some of those topics on this webinar. So I'm excited about that. Looking ahead, I think we're going to talk about berberine, urinary incontinence, lots of random health types of things. And of course, we'll talk about health topics and those types of things too. But today, we're going to talk about the top 10 diabetic terms that you should know. And I'm excited for this because there are a few things Dr. Saunders has added to this list that I don't even know why I need to know about them. So this is going to be good. Some of you will know some of these, but not all. So here we go. Let's dig into this. First of all, Dr. Saunders is a doctor, but he is not your doctor. So please consult with your healthcare provider before you implement any of the things that we say here today, okay? Let's dig into this. So first of all, I'm going to start here when we're talking about type 2 diabetes. Often on these webinars, you recommend that people get some testing done. And so first of all, let's talk about why you recommend this set of 4 things that you recommend, and then we're going to dig into each one. I'll just tell you what they are. Hemoglobin A1C, fasting glucose level, insulin level, and C-peptide. And so I will post those in the chat, but why do you recommend those tests, Dr. Saunders?
Okay, so this is a way of looking at giving you a snapshot, a picture of the immediate, what's going on right now while you're fasting, versus long term, what generally the way things are working. And so being able to see both of those is really helpful because what's going on immediately may not be representative of what's going on long term. And sometimes something won't show up long term that would be immediate. So, for example, we do hemoglobin A1C, and that is an average over about 3 months. And the reason for that is because the hemoglobin in your blood lasts for about 3 months, and then the cells are broken down and recycled through your spleen and your liver, and then they're all recycled, and your bone marrow makes new ones. So you're constantly making new ones, and this hemoglobin attaches glucose to it as it's swimming in the blood through all of this glucose in the blood, and the glucose is attaching to it one at a time here and there, and so that averages out to be a certain amount. Now, when you go to the lab and you get a hemoglobin A1C, what they're looking at is how much glucose is attached to that hemoglobin molecule in your red blood cell. And so depending on how much there is, they can say, oh, if it's a lot, that means you've averaged a lot over the life of that cell. And if it's a little, then your blood sugar's been generally low. So that's kind of an average. It's not really 3 months. It's probably a month or two. But either way, we're talking months of average. So if your hemoglobin A1C is 5.0, then your average blood glucose is going to be around in the 90s, 94, 95, 96, which is perfect. 5.0, that's perfect. That's where it should be. If your hemoglobin A1C is 6.0, then your average blood glucose is in the 150s. So that is really important, because if you look at just the change from 5.2 to 5.8, that change doubles your risk of dying. So it's not a small thing. Knowing your hemoglobin A1C is a really important thing. And knowing where it should be. So yes, 5.0 is perfect. Up to 5.4 is normal. And 5.7 is where we say it's pre-diabetes. So we sort of have names for it, but it isn't like hard and fast. You have to look at where are you on the scale, and lower is better to some extent. Now, that's not always true, and that's why we have to do the other ones. Because, for example, I've had people that have had hemoglobin A1C of 4.8, which is lower than the perfect number. Your actual blood sugar is lower than average. But then when we test their insulin, it's super high. So why is their hemoglobin low? Hemoglobin A1C low? It's because their average blood sugar is low because they're putting out too much insulin and they're getting hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. See? And that's not good either. That's actually a problem of early insulin resistance. So having a normal hemoglobin A1C, and sometimes doctors only do that one test. They go, yay, your hemoglobin A1C is perfect. And that's not always the case. You actually have to see the other tests. So then we do another test called glucose. And the glucose is what it is right now at that moment when they drew your blood. Now, 5 minutes later, it's going to be different. 10 minutes later, it could be way different. So what does that mean? Well, it sort of gives you okay, right at that moment, you were fasting. If it's 150, well, that's way out. That's way too high when you're fasting. It should never be that high. So, and if it's 30, then that's way too low. It should never be that low. And as long as it's in the 70 to 90 range, you go, okay, good. If it's a little bit high, like just over 100, 102, 103, we go, that's a little on the high side. You may have some insulin resistance. So now let's look at the insulin. And there's two tests we do for insulin as well. One is the insulin itself. And again, insulin is released immediately and it binds to receptors and it's gone. And so it's 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, you're going to have a different number. So it should not be going up and down really fast in the morning when you're fasting, because you didn't eat anything. If you eat something, boom, it's going to shoot up, and then you don't know whether it's going up or going down or where it is. So then you get the average, and this is not a 3-month average. This is like an hour's average, but it still gives you sort of an average of your insulin level. And the other, and that's called the C-peptide. Now, C-peptide is a peptide, which means a short protein that is cut off of the insulin. So your pancreas makes this big insulin molecule that doesn't work until it gets snipped. The C-peptide gets cut off, and then the rest of the part is the working insulin, and that's the working insulin. And then that C-peptide that gets cut off is hanging around in your blood for a little while, and it does some things, but it's not an active moment. Well, no, it just, you have to think of it like it doesn't do anything; it just sits there. So, why is that important? Because what if your doctor gave you insulin and you're injecting insulin? Well, when you're injecting insulin, you're just injecting this part. The C-peptide's not part of it. So when you do the C-peptide, that all of it comes from your pancreas. It doesn't come from your injection. So you can distinguish between what part of that insulin is from the pancreas and what part of it is from or is from the injection that you put in, right? So that's why those two are important especially for people who are injecting insulin. But even if not, the C-peptide still gives you more of a this is generally how much insulin we're putting out. The C-peptide number should be 1. If it's 0.8, that's fine. If it's 1.2, that's fine, but it should be right around 1. If it's 2, that's twice as high as it should be. If it's 5, that's 5 times as high as it should be. So those are the numbers you should be looking at. The insulin should be right around 5. And if it's 3 to 7, that's generally in the okay range. Now, 10 is considered normal. Less than 10 is fine. But if you're getting up 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere up in there, technically it's normal. But that's still, again, is kind of like your blood sugar being 105. It's just indicating that you may be having some insulin resistance. So that's what all 4 of those tests are, what they mean. I hope everybody's taking notes who has type 2, because that's important.
This is really good. I'm going to see if there's any questions that have come in about this. Can you get insulin level if you are taking insulin? Oh, we did kind of cover that.
Yeah. So you do the insulin level, but you also do the C-peptide. You need both of them if you're injecting insulin. Yeah.
Okay, good question. Let me see what else we have. Okay. All right. I'll get to the rest of those later. This is good. I'm taking notes, but I still have to review it because I feel like I learn more. Every single webinar, I'm still learning. Okay. Let's go to another term that we do need to know. And actually, you did touch on this already, but insulin resistance was going to be the next thing that we talk about. So let's go to that again.
Okay. Let's define insulin resistance. You make insulin, but it doesn't work. So why could it be that it doesn't work? Well, if you make bad insulin, it doesn't work. And that's like a type of type 1 diabetes from birth, because some people just make the wrong insulin, and it's just they have called the peptide. The amino acids aren't exactly correct, so it may not be fully functional, maybe partially functional. So sometimes that happens. But really with type 2, what we're looking at is insulin resistance due to dietary factors. And what happens is because you're not exercising very much and you're eating every day, then you're filling up your cells with glucose. You're going bloop, 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 bloop. Just like when you're at a gas pump and you're filling up your gas tank with gas. Bloop, 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 bloop. It gets to the top and the gas pump goes ding, stop. And so your cells stop making insulin receptors. Boom, no insulin receptors. Why is that important? Well, because you can't get sugar into a cell without insulin. It won't go through the cell membrane. So you have insulin receptors that are on there that are going, okay, when we got insulin, we can take in some glucose. And so they wait there. And then an insulin comes and binds to it and goes, okay, open up, and lets the glucose come into the cell. But when it's full up to the brim, then it shuts them off and says, nope, normal insulin receptors. So then insulin comes along, oh, nothing there, oh, nothing there, nothing there. And then the blood sugar starts going up because nobody's taking sugar in. And then your pancreas says, dude, we need more insulin because the blood sugar's going up. So as the blood sugar goes up, the pancreas makes more insulin. And so the insulin goes up, blood sugar goes up. And then the insulin goes up more, and then the blood sugar goes up more, and then the insulin goes. And that's what insulin resistance is. So if you stop eating, then the blood sugar will go down. You'll start using up the glucose in your cells, and then they'll open up again and go, oh, we need some more sugar, glucose. So then they make more insulin receptors, and then the insulin comes on and goes, oh, look, ooh, they bind to that. And then they start letting glucose go into the cells again. So insulin resistance is simply just too much glucose filling your cells. They're full, they're done, they don't need any more. And here, it's kind of like if you could hold your gas pump on and your gas tank's full and you just keep the pump on, and the gas is spilling out all over the ground and you just keep the pump on. That's what eating is. Eating is just holding that pump on and letting the gas spill out all over the place. You're eating glucose, you're spilling it out all over the place because you're not using it and you're already full. So that's what insulin resistance is being full.
All right. So good. I love the visual of this. It makes so much more sense. Okay. All right, our next term. Why do we need to know about triglycerides?
Okay, triglycerides. Triglycerides are fats, and the tri, meaning three, glycerides, there's a glycerin molecule that has 3 carbons on it, and then there's fats attached to each one of those. And so that's why it's a triglyceride. There's 3 fat molecules going off of each one of those in the glycerin. So why is that important? Because that's the way fats come into our body. That's what we use for energy. So those triglycerides are broken off into free fatty acids that allows your cells to make energy out of it. And here's the kicker. We need to get about 60% of our energy from fat. We don't need sugar for everything. We need mostly fat for energy. And if you have insulin resistance and your insulin is going up, the insulin blocks you from using fat. It tells your cells, don't use fat for energy. We have plenty of sugar here. Use the glucose instead. So then what happens is, because you can't use fat because the insulin is really high, so it's really blocking all the fat. And you still need about 60% to come from fat and 40% from glucose. So when you make less energy from fat, you actually just make less energy. So have you ever felt like or talk to someone that has diabetes and they go, oh, I'm so fatigued. Like I can't function. Like I just don't have any energy. Why not? Well, their batteries are actually low. They're on low battery because they're making less energy because the insulin resistance is blocking them from using fat for energy. So then what happens to the triglycerides in your blood? Boom, they shoot up because you can't use them. So that's why when you measure triglycerides and you see them over 150, that's an indication of insulin resistance. Over 100 is okay, but not ideal. Where you really want it to be is under 100, and ideally about the same as your HDL level, your high density lipoprotein level, HDL cholesterol. So your HDL cholesterol and your triglycerides should be about the same. It could be up to twice as much triglycerides as HDL, but more than that is indicative of insulin resistance.
And what did you say that number was? Right around?
Right around less than 100.
Less than 100. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, there were some questions that came in about that. How can my triglycerides increase when I'm on a vegan diet?
Because of sugar. So when you're on a vegan diet, you generally get a lot of sugar, glucose, right? So pasta, rice, corn, fruit, vegetables, carrots, potatoes, any starchy things or anything. So a vegan diet tends to be pretty high in starches and sugars. So what it's telling your body is use sugar, use sugar, use sugar, don't use fat. So we still have that same issue, right? Since you're not using fat and you still have fat around, you're going, I need to burn fat, but the insulin's blocking it, then the fat just goes up in the blood, and that's the triglycerides.
Okay, Lisa said, I wear a continuous glucose monitor. I stop eating around 6 to 7 at night with the average carbs of 20 grams per meal. Every night, my glucose increases throughout the night with a bigger spike around the time I get up every day, the dawn effect. But why does my levels increase overnight if I'm in fasting mode? Should I be worried about this issue?
No, you shouldn't be worried. Yes, you should be worried, but not worried like I'm gonna die. But worried in the sense of, okay, this is indicative of your set point. So what happens is that while you're in fasting mode, the pancreas is controlling your blood glucose by putting out insulin and glucagon. And there's a lot of other peptides involved in this, but I'm just going to make it simple. Glucagon tells your liver to make more glucose, make more sugar, and use fat to make ketones. The glucagon does both of those. But what happens is, and that's, those GLP-2, the GLP-1, Wegovy, and all those the injections that people are using for weight loss.
Yeah.
Those block this, by the way. They have a dampening effect so that you don't get that. But so what happens is the first thing the liver does is start taking the glucose out, because the liver stores glucose and is just letting it out. And so your glucose is going up, and it's an indication of insulin resistance. And you have a set point, an ideal point for your blood glucose. And some people are, because the glucose has been high for a long time, their set point is 150, let's say. And then if they were to have a normal blood glucose at 70, they might go, oh, I'm feeling hypoglycemic. How could you feel hypoglycemic with normal blood sugar? Well, because your set point is high. So while you're sleeping, your glucagon is telling your liver to make glucose because you're fasting, right? And you haven't eaten a lot of carbs. So it can go up and it can be high, but it's an indication of insulin resistance and high set point.
Okay, lots of questions about this. If you can post your questions in the Q&A, that would be great. It's a little easier to manage those there. Okay, what else did I see here? Oh, can your triglycerides be high due to kidney disease?
Gosh, I don't know the connection between triglycerides and kidney disease. Usually the triglycerides are high not because of the kidney disease, but because of the metabolic problem, like insulin resistance, diabetes, that kind of thing. And then that also causes kidney problems, but so they can be associated. But I don't know of a specific connection of triglycerides being high because of kidney disease specifically.
Okay. Okay, let's do our last term, visceral obesity. Why do we need to know this?
Okay, visceral obesity. Now that is belly fat. And if you've ever seen people with like stick arms and stick legs, and they're really skinny arms and legs, and then their belly is just like busting out there, and they can't button their buttons on their shirt, or the shirt. Sometimes people they wear their shirt up over their belly button because the belly's sticking out so far that it's too tight around their belly. Okay, that's visceral obesity. Okay, that's the outside visceral obesity. But what's going on the inside? We have two different kinds of fat. We have fat under our skin, and that's where it's stored for energy supply primarily. And then we have this fat around our kidneys and spleen and liver. And then there's something called the omentum, and that's all called viscera. All the organs of our intestines are called viscera. And so visceral obesity is this fat around our organs is all enlarged. Now, that's kind of important because that kind of fat has a lot of metabolic problems. Well, they cause a lot of metabolic problems when you get a lot of that. If you get just fat under your skin and you don't have visceral obesity, you won't have diabetes, you won't have heart disease, you don't have any like bigger risks, and you can be really, really big and fat and obese. And if you don't have visceral obesity, then it's not a metabolic problem, right? You don't have a metabolic disease. Well, you do, but it's excess storage, and that's all. Whereas the visceral obesity actually changes your metabolism. It changes your hormones. It converts testosterone into estrogen. So men get man boobs because of it. It causes you to have more insulin resistance and diabetes, and you want more glucose. You get cravings for sugar and starch, and I just need bread, kind of thing. So, so the metabolic problems associated with the visceral obesity lead to or part of this diabetes. Well, how does the visceral obesity happen, and why do these people that drink beer all day long? I used to live in Venezuela, and when I was there, it was kind of interesting to watch these guys who were barely in their 30s, and they already had their bellies were so big they could not button their shirts over their bellies, and so they would leave their shirts open all the time. You could see their belly button poking out because they were so big, but they were not fat. They had, they were skinny all over the place except for their bellies. Well, why is that? Why does it only happen in the belly? Insulin. Insulin is the problem. And so think about it. What is beer? Beer is a pure carbohydrate. Alcohol causes insulin release. The carbohydrate from the barley in there, it is a carbohydrate drink, and they're drinking all day long. Not necessarily a lot, but continuously. And because it's continuous, every time you drink something with carbohydrate, you release insulin. And then another sip, you release insulin. Then another sip, you release insulin. So your insulin is always high. It never goes down. So everything you eat, it's not going to be stored on your body. It's going to be stored in your belly. People that get adrenal problems, they have high cortisol levels because their adrenal glands are dysfunctional from an adrenal tumor or something. They get a lot of visceral obesity. Their bellies get really big. They also tend to get it, around the neck and have those kind of problems. But why? Why do they get visceral obesity? Because stress, cortisol, causes insulin resistance, and the insulin goes up, and the insulin causes the visceral obesity. The cortisol causes the people that are built like a wall, their necks are bigger than their heads, it goes, and they go all the way down. Their trunks are just really big. But the visceral part is still due to insulin because the cortisol causes insulin resistance. So so they still get diabetes and they still have all those problems. So that's why visceral obesity is really important. It's not a small thing with diabetes.
Yeah. Will said, does visceral obesity relate to umbilical hernia?
It can, yes, it can. So if you have that extra pressure in there, then the umbilicus could pop out.
Yeah.
I was buying a car, and my daughter said, "You should get an Audi." I go, "No, I prefer 80s."
Okay, so Anonymous had said, how do you reduce visceral fat?
Okay, so the way to reduce visceral fat is to get your insulin down to 0. So how do you get it down to 0? Fat does not cause you to release insulin. So if you eat fat, you don't make insulin. Protein does cause a little bit of insulin release, and sugar causes a lot of insulin release. So the two things to do are to not eat. So every time you're not eating, you stop making insulin. So fasting is a good way to get the insulin down. And then the other way is to eat fat. So they have all these fat fasts now, kind of thing. And the purpose of it is really to get your insulin levels down, to get rid of the belly fat. I watched a movie a few weeks ago about 2 Australian brothers who fasted they said 40 days. They actually fasted for 20 days and then did 20-day juice cleanse after that. But during their 20 days of fasting, and they didn't start out fat. They were not obese. They didn't have a lot of belly fat. But you could totally see, and they did daily pictures after it was all done. and you can see these 20 pictures in a row of them starting off with just a normal flat belly, to by the end of 20 days, it was like a sunken belly, like they were sucking it in, it looked like, because they'd lost all their belly fat. So because they weren't making any insulin, they were actually fasting, drinking only water for 20 days. So that's it. That's what it takes. And if you look at the diabetes solution kit, we recommend, we're like, it's okay to eat fat and it's okay to have fiber carbohydrates, but avoid carbs that release insulin. And so over time, your insulin level will drop and you'll be able to use that belly fat.
Okay. I'm going to go through some more of these questions. If you can post those in the Q&A, again, that would be great. Lakshmi says, my fasting blood sugar glucose usually around 100. It went up to 187. Is it because of a UTI?
Yes. Infections will definitely cause it. And you know what? Don't try to control it. Don't start injecting insulin or something to try and get it down. That's not the issue. The issue is the inflammation, the infection. Get rid of the infection first and then monitor your blood glucose again.
Okay. Someone was worried about you last week.
Oh.
Gary says, is Barton Nutrition's product Fiber Greens good or great for diabetes?
Okay, fiber is really good and really great for diabetes, and that's fine. However, in the process of formulating fiber greens, we were told that you have to have some stevia in there, or nobody's gonna drink it. And so it was formulated with stevia. I think we're in the process of reformulating one for diabetes that's not going to have the stevia in it. And it's because stevia and all artificial sweeteners can cause, and often do cause, insulin release from the pancreas. Just the taste of sweet prepares your body for sugar, and part of that is by making insulin. So some people, it's a really strong response. We've had people comment here on our program and say, wow, I was on the diabetes solution kit. I was on the diet doing it perfectly for 6 weeks and nothing happened until I stopped chewing sugar-free gum.
Yeah.
Sugar-free gum has 0 calories, right? It shouldn't do anything. But that's sweet, and the sweet taste causes release of insulin, more insulin resistance. So so fiber greens is great for everyone who doesn't have insulin resistance.
And I know someone's going to ask, but what about the natural sugars? What about honey or those?
Yep.
Same thing?
It's the same thing. If it tastes sweet, avoid it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Bob says, I have a heart health question. Can I ask this on the webinar?
Of course.
You can ask, of course. Maybe you did below, but go ahead and ask in the chat. Let's see. Jamie says, does type 2 cause balance problems?
Well, ask in the Q&A. Does diabetes cause balance problems? Some people, when they have wide swings in their glucose level, then there are changes in the fluids of their body. And some of these fluids are kind of very slow to exchange out, like the fluid in your eyeballs. And so people's vision is going to change, and I can focus on that now. I couldn't focus on it yesterday because of changes in their glucose. And these are called osmotic changes. One of the other ones is in the inner ear, in the vestibular system in the inner ear, that keeps your balance. And that can change due to osmotic pressure changes because of glucose. So when there's wide swings in your glucose, yes, it can affect your like dizziness, your vestibular system stability.
Claude says, what's the number for glucose?
For glucose, oh, I didn't say it. 70 to 90. That's the optimum place to be, between 70 and 90. If you're in Canada, it's between 4 and 5. So 4 point something is the optimum place to be.
Okay. I have talked to a lot of people whose doctors were like okay with them being at like 150.
Yeah.
And is that to keep them on medication or what is the goal there? I'm confused.
It's so people don't get frustrated and upset and quit, because it's pretty hard to get below 150. It's pretty easy to stay below 150. It's not healthy, but from their point of view, it's better than being 200. So,
Okay. Just taking some notes here for my Canadian friends because I want to remember these numbers. So between 4 and 5 Canadian numbers. I used to have that written down, but
yeah.
okay. What is your opinion about the natural Manjaro drink?
Okay. I've looked into some of those. I don't know which one you're talking about. There's a drink that's supposed to be induce the GLP-1, just like Monjaro does. So if you were to actually take semaglutide, Monjaro is, I don't think it's semaglutide. I think it's the other one, tirzepatide, right? Tirzepatide. So if you were to actually take that, it is a protein that'll be broken down in your stomach and it'll go nowhere. So that's not what that is. The drinks are supposed to induce you to make the GLP-1, that your actually natural hormone. And do they work? Yeah, they could work.
Okay. Anonymous says, what medications or supplements are good to dissolve a clot in the heart?
Ooh, a clot in the heart. That's bad news. Okay, so to dissolve it, if you know you have a clot, then gosh, you need clot busters. But dang, the natural way to do it is nattokinase or lumbrokinase. Those are both clot dissolving enzymes, and if I had a clot that was nearer in my heart, I would take pretty large doses of it. So that it comes in units or milligrams. The units is about 4,000 units twice a day of the nattokinase, and the milligrams would be, I think it's like 200 milligrams. I think it's like 10, okay, so it's 400 milligrams twice a day would be nattokinase dose.
Anonymous says, why does my hand get cold when I fast?
Oh, yeah, your hands get cold. That's actually a real thing. So what happens is you are lowering your thermostat in order to conserve energy because you're not eating. And it's a very natural response. I get that way too. I get really cold when I fast.
Okay. Regan says, what are your thoughts on the Shilajit supplement? It's supposed to balance hormones. Any thoughts on that? I actually have some from Organifi.
Oh, jeet. I've seen it. I don't know. I don't know enough about it
Okay.
to know if it balances hormones. I didn't know it did that.
I didn't know it did that either, but I know we're hearing more and more about it. So let's see. Anonymous says, what are the benefits of hawthorn berry and do you use it in your practice?
Hawthorn berry is for lowering blood pressure. I don't generally use it because what I do instead is look for why. So why is the blood pressure elevated in the first place? Instead of using hawthorn berry to try and lower blood pressure, and even things like L-arginine and citrulline and all those. Uh, uh, that are specifically to lower blood pressure. I think it's better to find out why. So if somebody has a kidney problem, deal with the kidney problem. And like I had somebody with a renal artery stenosis where the kidney just was not getting enough blood flow. So they put a stent in there, and all of a sudden his blood pressure is perfectly normal. He doesn't have any problems anymore and doesn't need any medication, doesn't need any herbs or supplements or anything.
Did I read that? No. Lakshmi says, in October of 2024, my A1C was 6.2. Now it's 7.2. PCCP wants me to take metformin 500 milligrams a day. I'm getting you 2C today. I'm not sure what that end part means. I'm getting you.
Okay, so let's talk about this general concept of starting medications, metformin.
Yeah.
So of all the diabetes medications, metformin's the most reasonable one. And in other words, it has probably fewer side effects than fewer side effects. And it does actually help change you to fat burning metabolism. And but you have to consider that it blocks you from using glucose for energy. It's not like nothing. It does something. It has an effect on your metabolism. And so a much better way to go, if your hemoglobin A1C went from 6.2 to 7.2, that's a significant jump in 1 year. That's a big deal. So I think I would just go get the diabetes solution kit, start on page 1, fill out all the forms and go through and do phase 1. And you'll be amazed how you can get to a normal blood glucose without any medications at all. And if you look at what metformin does, berberine does the same thing and doesn't have the side effects. So I might even get berberine instead. You can get it on our website. And also take the synochroma. Because the synochroma, it's not magical. It's not going to all of a sudden make you not have diabetes unless you're deficient in something, and that's the cause of it. Because all this is, the purpose for the synochroma is to deal with the common deficiencies. And so I would take those instead of metformin and then do phase 1 of the program. And I think that would just like fix you right up.
Okay. Still getting a lot of questions over in the chat. So if you can post those in the Q&A, that'd be great. Here's Bob's heart health question. I have had very high calcification of my arteries for many years now. My coronary calcium score was 494 back in 2018, and my total cholesterol was 220. My cardiologist wanted to put me on statins right away. I chose not to go on statins and instead went on a natural cocktail that actually lowered my cholesterol to 159 in 3 months. Then in 2023, because of chest pains, they did a CT scan as well as another coronary calcium test, and that came back at 694 and said I need to have an angio. When they did the angio, they put 2 stents on 2 nearly blocked arteries, 95% blocked. They also put me on a statin, 10 milligrams, and aspirin. I feel great and I don't have any pains at this time, but I really don't like being on the statin. Is there anything I can do to get off the statin?
Well, is there anything you can get off to get off any poison? Yeah, just avoid it. Yeah, just okay. So think about what it really is. It's a statin is poisoning a system that is normally there. It's an enzyme called HMG-CoA reductase. And so it poisons the enzyme so that you can't make as much cholesterol. But cholesterol is not related to your coronary calcium score. There is no relationship at all. And cholesterol is also not related to your blocked arteries. So the fact that you had 95% blockage in your arteries means that you have arterial disease, and the fact that you have your coronary calcium score of 600 is indicative of this is a chronic problem. So why do they get blocked? That's the question. Do they get blocked with cholesterol? Is that the problem? No, multiple studies have shown that's not the problem. The problem is clots. So forming clots. So really, taking the statin is a distraction from the real problem. The real problem being, why are you forming clots? How do we know it's clots? Because your coronary calcium score is high. Coronary calcium only happens when you have clots that organize and calcify. That's what they do. Everything does. If you have torn tendons and you get bone spurs. What's a bone spur? That's just calcification of the torn tendon that got some scar tissue and calcified. So that calcification is an indication that you have some scar tissue, essentially, and that's what an organized clot is. So we know they're clots. And the statin and cholesterol does not deal with those clots at all. Never has, never will. And I know cardiologists talk about this a lot, but that's like going to a chiropractor and saying, well, why did he adjust my spine? That's not what I needed. Well, that's what he does. You're not going to go to an acupuncturist and say, well, why did they poke me with needles when I had an infection and didn't need the needles? Well, because that's what they do. So this is what the cardiologist does. They have a box, and this is what we can do, anything in this box. And if it's outside the box, we don't do that. And so clotting, the underlying reason for the heart disease is not inside a cardiologist's box. So you have to look outside the box. And so why are you creating clots? Is there inflammation? Do you have a lipoprotein A excess? And that would be a genetic problem. Do you have other like infections? Well, that would be inflammation too. So finding the cause of your clotting is the next step.
Okay, that's good. Tom, nope, we did that one. Mary says, how can I lower my set point of blood glucose? If I continue eating about 40 grams of carbs daily as I'm doing now, will my set point eventually lower itself?
It could. 40 grams is not very much carbohydrates. And if you're exercising significantly, that will tend to, because the exercise acts like insulin to bring glucose into your muscle cells. And so your insulin level will drop lower. So yeah, that could help. If you did the diabetes solution kit and did 20 grams of carbohydrates, that would work even faster. If you fasted and didn't eat anything or just drank water for whatever long period of time until you'd lose about a pound a day. So however many pounds you have to lose, you can do that many days of fasting. Then it would go even faster.
Okay. Anonymous says, which is the healthiest milk to use when making shakes to provide adequate calcium intake?
Okay.
Which part of that question do you want to dig into
Yeah,
first?
let's start with the milks. There are no milks that are good sources of calcium, really. None of them. No nut milks. The cow's milk is okay, is a source of calcium, but it's not all available. Really, there is an abundance of calcium in food. That's not the problem. If you were to take a vitamin D dose, let me. If I gave you a vitamin D, a single dose of like 100,000 units of vitamin D, you could get vitamin D toxicity. You know what that is? It's hypercalcemia. It's high calcium. Where does the calcium come from? You absorb it through your intestines from your food. So the problem is not the amount that's in the food. The problem is the absorption. So if you want to increase your calcium, increase your vitamin D, but make sure you get vitamin K, because if you don't have vitamin K, then you don't deposit it in your bones. You can deposit it in your arteries and create the calcium deposits in the arteries, which are a problem. So you don't need calcium supplements. Multiple studies have shown that. But magnesium might be a good idea.
Are you a fan of shakes?
No, because they have sugar in them. They always do. How do you get a shake without sugar? We have one, and my son drinks it, and he puts the protein, chocho protein powder that is just chocho. It just has a lot of protein and no carbs and no sugar, and it's so that's all it is. And then he puts creatine in it, and then it doesn't taste good, and he drinks it. So because shakes that are good for you don't taste good, I'm not a fan of shakes.
Okay. Tom says, I also have a question about plant-based peptides, chelated amino acids that are targeted for visceral fat. Are they viable?
Um, so yes, in a way, but that's not the issue. So I think it's a distraction from the real issue. I think if you have visceral obesity, just deal with the real issue, and that's high insulin levels. And keep in mind that protein can cause, even plant proteins, especially plant protein, can cause the release of insulin, which then is the opposite. But if you have proteins that are flavored and have like artificial sweeteners in them or sugars of some kind or whatever, um, then then it's gonna go backwards because you're gonna release insulin and you're gonna get more visceral obesity. So really, just deal with the insulin because that's the problem with visceral obesity.
Um, Hannah said, how important is homocysteine in cholesterol?
Okay, so homocysteine and cholesterol should not be confused. Cholesterol is one issue, and your level should be around 230. That's the optimum level of cholesterol. So shoot for 230 in your cholesterol, but anywhere between 210 and 250 is still a kind of an optimum range. Um, and then homocysteine is a marker for methylation, and that's B6, B9, B12. And if you don't methylate well, then you're going to have a lot of other problems, including heart disease. Methylation is really important for energy production, for the mitochondria to function properly, and for like a, a ton of different actions in the body, detox, um, turning on and off all your genes. This methylation thing is huge. And so knowing your homocysteine, oh, this is really interesting about homocysteine. Like everything in the world, if you test anything against mortality, death, there's a U-shaped curve, or they call it a J curve, but it's often U-shaped. So cholesterol, if you drop your cholesterol below 200, your death rate starts going up. If you go above 100, 250, your death rate starts going up. So you have this U-shaped curve. And vitamin D, if you're dropping below 30, then your death rate goes up. If you're going above 100, the death rate starts going up, but not quite as much. Maybe that's why I call it a J curve. But almost everything has this U-shaped curve when you look at mortality, except homocysteine. It's one of the very few things that the less the better. So when you get to 0 homocysteine, you have the lowest death rate compared to any level of homocysteine. So there's no like perfect level of homocysteine. Less is better.
Interesting. Okay, that's good. Okay, I think you need to go. So we'll see you next week, Dr. Saunders.
All right, next week.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Okay, I'm just going to answer some of these questions if I can. So someone said, I have fiber green. Should I keep taking it? I have type 2. Here's the deal. What we recommend a lot of people is to go through the diabetes solution kit. You can find that at bartonwebinar.com. Dr. Saunders talks a lot about, going through phase 1, and that is where you're not having anything sweet. As you go through the phases of that, you may want to try to reintroduce things and see how you respond. If your blood sugar is in a good range, try the fiber greens, see what happens. If your blood sugar doesn't spike, you'll know you're okay. Let me see here. Yeah, if you're really looking, if you're someone who has type 2, maybe you're taking a bunch of medications. I've seen a few messages about this. Your numbers are high, you want help. Dr. Saunders' recommendation is going to be to start with the diabetes solution kit. And I usually have mine right here. Where is it? Okay, you can find it at bartonwebinar.com. Use code webinar25. You will save 25%, under $20 for the digital copy of that book. It goes through exactly what Dr. Saunders would recommend to someone in his office. It's basically a low carb diet. You're eating under 20 net grams of carbs per day. We have people on this webinar who have done that with great success. So check that out. If some of your testing and those results, share those on the next webinar if you want his feedback about that. But that's what he recommends, is to do the diabetes solution kit, okay? Let me see here. What else? Okay, so if you guys want to if you want to find all of our past webinars, which I highly recommend, you can get a great education there. The easiest way for me to just tell you to do that is to go to bartonwebinar.com, and there is a link to our YouTube channel there. Click it, subscribe. You can search all our webinars there, or if you subscribe, you'll also be notified every time we go live. So check that out. Let's see. I don't know that I can answer any more of these. I think that's probably it for me. Welcome to all of you who are new. I'm glad that you were here today. We're excited to have you. And that'll be it. Okay, we'll see you next week. Bring your questions, post them in the Q&A when you get here next week. And thank you for joining us. Go back and watch some of those older webinars. They're not old, but the ones that we've done previously. Such good information. Tom. Okay, I'm going to try to put that in my notes. No, it's not going to let me copy that. Okay. All right.